Welcome back to the Ultraviolet Tide. It is December, so we are back with another episode of the top 5 on the Tide. And today's episode, we're doing something really special. We started doing this a few months ago with October's episode that really tackled Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And then we went into ocular melanoma awareness. And today we are talking about melanoma and pregnancy. And we really noticed a trend in this community with so many women who had either been diagnosed during their pregnancy or while they were postpartum. And we knew we had to bring an episode and talk about this. So today's stories are all geared around that. And of course, I have two wonderful guests joining me. The first is Leah Adams, who you all know and love. And our second special guest is Caitlyn Scaggs. And if you guys do not know her, I hope at the end of this episode, you know her so much better and are connecting with her on all the platforms. So Leah and Caitlyn, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you both. I told you guys when we started and joined this meeting that I feel so giddy right now. You two are two of my favorite people. You're both so inspiring. You're both so positive and great. Well, one, leaders in this community, but just leaders in life in general. So let me do an introduction to Caitlyn, and then we're really going to dive into this episode and talk about all the things. So Caitlyn is an author, an entrepreneur, a former police officer, and like I mentioned, she also happens to be one of my favorite humans and inspirations, really working to create change in the world around her. As a personal backstory, we actually first connected when I was an undergrad at Virginia Tech. I interviewed her for a class project, and then I worked at her marketing firm, Blue Mobius, Throwback. And then we really connected over her melanoma story and stayed in touch for all of these years. Caitlyn, I think that was like 7 or 8 years ago, which is absolutely mind-boggling.
Well, I just love too that we've been able to stay in touch and encourage each other along the journey, right?
Absolutely, for sure. So we'll dive a little bit more into Caitlyn's story, but she was first diagnosed with melanoma when she was 25 and pregnant with her first child, who now looks like an absolute copycat of you, Caitlyn. It's actually so crazy. And the last thing I have to plug before we really dive into this episode, and I hand it over to you, Caitlyn, is that you now work with New Hope Girls, which is a nonprofit organization that fights human trafficking and does incredible work. So hopefully that offers people a little bit of a overview about who you are as a person. Now I have to ask an icebreaker because Leah and I are a house divided on this topic. Do you decorate for Christmas before or after Thanksgiving?
Well, is my Christmas tree up right now? The answer is yes, because my family is Christmas decor obsessed. For Mother's Day, I got to choose what movie we watched as a family, and I picked The Grinch. So, needless to say, I come in firm and definitive on this debate of yes, Christmas before Thanksgiving. We do pause to do the Thanksgiving thing, but girl, the decorations are up. We're ready.
I love it.
I was telling Erica before you hopped on, Caitlyn, like for me, I just feel like we live in such a time goes by so fast. Like right now, I don't know, as I'm getting older, just like things are just happening faster and faster. And like for somebody who has a very much anxious brain, like I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't be looking at Christmas trees before Halloween or right after. Like I have like a set agenda, like after Thanksgiving we're going to move, progressively through the holidays. But I get why people do it. It's just personally, it's got to be an after Thanksgiving thing for me, or else it just causes too much stress in my body.
Fair.
It's so funny. I told Leah when she joined that this Christmas tree is for her today. I decorated just for her because I know her personal opinion on it.
I'll let it slide.
Well, I'm going to dive into our first story today. So we have 3 stories, and Caitlyn, I'm going to use the story as really a catalyst for you to tell us about your melanoma story. So the first story is from MD Anderson, and it is about pregnancy-related skin changes or skin cancer and really how to tell the difference, which is very hard because so many things happen to your body during pregnancy and you're like, is this normal? Is this not normal? I have absolutely no idea. So the MD Anderson article explains how to differentiate between common pregnancy-related skin changes and potential signs of skin cancer. So we all know that there are a lot of hormonal shifts that happen during pregnancy that can really cause benign changes like melasma, linea nigra, or new moles. But really sudden changes in mole size, color, or shape could indicate melanoma. So these skin cancer symptoms that I know we all know so well, but again, as your body's changing, it's really hard to know exactly what that looks like. But common skin cancer symptoms could be mole changes. So what you should be looking for during pregnancy is extra pigment that can change color or shape or cause the moles to look just a little bit funkier than normal. And while this isn't necessarily an increased risk of skin cancer, people are more likely to put off their skin checks during pregnancy. We are going to so many doctor's appointments. I feel like every single day I am just adding a new one to my calendar that you really just don't want to go to another doctor's appointment. So we put off those changes. You really don't get them checked as often as they should be. So I'm going to pause there. And Caitlyn, because I remember back from our conversation in 2021, I believe, when we were talking about your melanoma story, and you shared how it was actually your husband who raised a red flag when he saw a suspicious mark on your back and then pointed it out to your OB. And I know you dealt with a lot of the same feelings of, I don't want to go to another doctor's appointment. So can you walk us through the red flags? And in hindsight, were there any red flags that you noticed? Let's start talking a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was around 26 or 27 weeks pregnant, so I definitely had a belly, and with it comes the back pain. And in particular, when my husband noticed it, I was having back pain, and I had kind of flopped over on the couch, and he came and sat next to me and was just rubbing my lower back. And as he did so, he said, "Well, that doesn't look right." And I was like, "What?" I got so mean. Like, I was just so annoyed. What doesn't look right? You know, because to your point, when we're pregnant, nothing looks right. Right? I mean, it's beautiful, it's glowing, but it's weird. And we play the game of, is it normal? Is it weird? You know, so there was that whole element of, I just didn't want to hear one more thing. So much was changing. I did not need to be picked apart. I did not need to be assessed. My back hurts. Give me a back rub. But he said, "No, really, that doesn't look right. I really think you need to get it checked." And I flippantly said, "Okay, fine. Next time I'm at the baby doctor, I will get it checked." And so the next appointment with my OB came. You know, they have you come in so regularly. And I didn't ask her because it, to me, was a non-issue. To me, it was, you're picking on me because I'm pregnant. I'm tired of the litany of tests. Leave me alone. Clearly, I have a little bit of a spicy personality at times, but I just was unwilling to believe there was a problem. And also, pregnancy is magical and beautiful, and this child was hard for us. Like, we didn't come by pregnancy easy. So also, it was like, don't even dim the shine I am feeling right now for all that this represents, right? All the joy that this season holds. So then I think there was another appointment that came and went, and he's like, "You still didn't ask her." No, I still didn't ask her. And then finally he came with me, and I don't know why he was with me, but it's one of those things that I look back on and it, you know, it kind of gets me, because it's like, that was my saving grace, is that he came to an appointment, and thank goodness he's a committed partner and husband and dad and all the things, because he came to that appointment with me, and he has some nerve too, because listen what he did. I'm walking out of the appointment is over, and he literally lifts up the back of my shirt and says, "What do you think of this?" And, you know, we have clear boundaries around no physical contact, but that was about the closest I came to hitting him. Like, are you kidding me right now? I was so mad, but she took one look at it, one glance, and she said, "You need to see a dermatologist." And I looked at her and said, "You mean to tell me you think this is skin cancer?" And she said, "I mean to tell you, it looks suspicious, and I'm not a dermatologist. I can't address it, but we've got a couple in the area who can." And so I just, you know, made the appointment and was indignant. I was convinced that everyone was picking on me because I'm pregnant. I was convinced there was this like conspiracy against me to just make me, you know, give samples in cups and stick me and drink this drink. And now we're going to go to the doctor and look at your skin. And I had never been to the dermatologist. I had never been. And I remember going and just feeling smug. Like, he's about to tell you guys to leave me alone. Like, this guy's gonna have me. He's gonna know you're the problem and I am fine. And no, I sat down and he was like, yeah, so we're gonna take a biopsy of that. I mean, there was no hesitation. And same thing, I looked at him and said, like, you think this could be skin cancer? And he said, I think you need a biopsy. And I just, again, felt like you guys have lost your minds. Had never had surgery. I had never had stitches. I had never broken a bone. So to have a biopsy, I will tell you, I've had so many now that they're like, kind of nothing. Back then, that was like, you might as well be doing brain surgery. I'm pregnant. You're cutting into me. I just was all in pieces over it. And still convinced that the entire community, this medical world, my husband, everybody was just out to pick on me and being patronizing. And I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Looking back on it, but that's where I was. And so I remember that I had the biopsy on Christmas Eve. So I guess that would be December 23rd. And then I believe it was the 29th. Oh, I hate even, like, it's hard to even remember, right?
Yeah, right.
I was at work. I was a police officer at the time, but I was on desk duty because I was pregnant. And I was sitting with another officer side by side doing something on a computer. And I saw my phone ring and I had saved him in the dermatology. It said dermatologist. And I looked at my coworker and I actually said, hold on a second. Let me make sure I don't have skin cancer. Like, it was that out of, like, I was that flippant, right? So I'm like, hi, this is Caitlyn. And I heard the dermatologist's voice. It was not the nurse. It was the dermatologist. And something about that I knew. And I remember thinking instantly, like, all these thoughts are still so fresh. I was like, oh my gosh, I must have like basal cell carcinoma. Like, that was the only one I really thought could even, whew. And then he said, who he was. And he said, you have melanoma. And I mean, my world, it's been 13 years.
The feelings are still so fresh, though.
And I still remember the fear. Yeah. 13 years later, and I still remember the first thing I said to him. And I said, am I going to see my baby go to kindergarten? And I think that fear, I can't believe I was so flippant about skin cancer, because a year prior, I lost a coworker and he was 25. It started on his foot. And I just remember thinking it was just such like a freak thing, right? Like, that doesn't happen. And I remember his story was so tragic and that just never happens. And he's so young and things like that don't happen. And so this can't happen to me, as evidenced by my lack of belief that I actually had a problem, when the most important person to me in the world said, you, I think, have a problem. My doctor said, you, I think, have a problem. And then a dermatologist said, you've got something we need to investigate. And I still was not believing them. So he told me that. And he pretty quickly said, there's some really encouraging things about the features of your melanoma. We've gotten it at a really great point. You need almost immediate surgery. And then he started looping in my OB, and there were so many phone calls, and, my blood pressure went through the roof. I ended up getting admitted to the hospital because I just wasn't coping. I mean, just to be very blunt, like, it was way too much. It was way too overwhelming. I was wrapped in a great support system between my parents and my husband and my church family. But that was just, for me, there was so much learning, so much painful learning that happened in that diagnosis.
A quick break to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by Low Ultraviolet. Low Ultraviolet is a safe and fashionable UPF 50+ clothing brand on a mission to educate and protect the public from skin cancer. You can use code podcast15 at checkout for 15% off your order at lowultraviolet.com. Offer valid 1 per customer. Now, let's get back to today's episode. And I mean, I think Leah and I can talk about this all the time, Caitlyn, but like the feelings and remembering how you feel when you get that phone call, that doesn't go away. And Leah, I mean, we can also talk about the fact that you were also really young when you were diagnosed with melanoma too, and you don't think it's going to happen to you, or you don't even know that you're at risk for melanoma. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, no. And Caitlyn, thank you so much for, being so vulnerable. And I know what it's like to relive that story. And I can't imagine reliving that, being pregnant. Like, that just, I mean, that's just icing on the cake, essentially. But what I really resonate with your story, Caitlyn, even though I wasn't pregnant at the time, with my melanoma, but what I was very flippant, like you were. Like I had this attitude going into my skin check, the attitude even after the skin check. It'll never happen to me. It can't happen to me. And I always talk about this in my story when I share mine is like, why do we think we live on this earth feeling so invincible? Like nothing could ever touch us, nothing could ever impact us. And then it does. And your life completely turns around. And it's just such an eye opener that I feel like we all kind of have that experience. And for me, I was 26 years old, never went in for a skin check, had a suspicious mole that my mom caught. So, it's so funny. Shout out to the people that love us in our life that are looking at our largest organ, because if she didn't really bring that to my attention, I would have never gone in for that skin check. And I always think about, to this very day, what if I never went in? I don't even know if I'd be here right now. So, shout out to your husband, shout out to, my mom who caught my melanoma and my dad's melanoma, his first melanoma, which was a month before mine. So I think, you don't know what you don't know. And I think it goes back to Erica knows probably what I'm going to say. There's a lot of lack of education going on around melanoma and skin cancer. People don't think that it can happen to them, and it can. Just having a couple of blistering sunburns in childhood years puts you at a higher risk of developing melanoma. Having fair skin, having blue eyes, having blonde hair, having a family history of melanoma, having a lot of moles, having a lot of atypical moles, having a lot of sun exposure, whether it's from the sun or tanning beds, all of that is putting people at risk. And honestly, at the end of the day, who do we not know that doesn't meet a couple of those risk factors? So I think it just goes back to really, educating more people on this, because anybody can get skin cancer, whether you're Black, whether you're white, whether you're male, whether you're female, whether you're whatever ethnicity, and especially melanoma, it can get really bad really fast if it's not caught early.
Yeah, another thing too that we were talking about as we were kind of prepping for this episode is the correlation between hormonal shifts and melanoma. And it's something that there is really not a lot of information about. And we have talked about it on this podcast before. We had Marianne Bannister, who is the founder of the Claire Marie Foundation, come on to talk about hormonal changes and her young daughter who actually passed away from melanoma. And when she was diagnosed, or in the time leading up to her diagnosis, it was really hard for her to have her daughter taken seriously, because there were so many conversations around, well, she's so young, she's still a teenager, she hasn't even started college yet, this is not something you have to worry about. And there, I hope this episode serves as like kind of a call to action, that if researchers are listening, or organizations that really put funds behind these types of research studies, they use it as an opportunity to really look at hormonal shifts, whether it be during pregnancy or whether it be during puberty, and figure out what is going on between those changes in our body and melanoma and skin cancer. One thing I do want to say is that pregnancy and puberty does not cause melanoma, but there is some kind of weird thing that's going on behind the scenes where it kind of activates it and it makes changes occur more quickly. So I did want to kind of plug that. And that wasn't part of this story, but I feel like it's the perfect opportunity to really try and put some funds behind this so we can see some changes. So that wraps up our first story. So Leah, I will hand it over to you to launch into our second story.
Yeah, no, thanks, Erica. So our next story is from a source called Mole Map, which is an Australian news source. And the article is titled Bria's Story. At 37 weeks pregnant, I was told I had melanoma. So I know, Caitlyn, you shared you were around 25, 26 weeks. And so this woman was literally at the very end of her pregnancy almost. So the story talks about at 37 weeks pregnant, Bria Millen noticed a darkened mole and sought a skin check, assuming pregnancy-related melanin changes. She was quoted, "I made an appointment at a Sydney skin cancer clinic. They performed a full skin examination, took a biopsy of the darkened mole, and I was confident the biopsy would come back as benign. There is no history of melanoma in my family, and despite having a lot of moles, no suspicions were raised in previous skin checks." She said, "I was in the final trimester of my pregnancy, so I was in deep pregnancy mode, bliss, and focused on becoming a mom. But what happened next changed everything." And so her biopsy results came back, and she was unfortunately diagnosed with melanoma. Doctors delayed her melanoma surgery after her son's birth, removing the melanoma with clear margins shortly after delivery. So she was quoted again saying, "During those few weeks, there was a lot of anticipation, feelings of anxiousness, nervousness consumed her, distracted her from what should be really a happy time, not dealing with a cancer diagnosis." And she said, "My son Austin was born at 42 weeks. And the day after she got out of the hospital with him, she went in for surgery to remove what was left of the melanoma. And thankfully, the results came back with clear margins and there was no need for further treatment." So I really just thought the story was really powerful for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of what was mentioned in the previous article was very relatable to this article. She thought, the skin changes on her body were just normal, right? With pregnancy. Another thing, we have this woman talking about how, she's from Australia. And for those of you listening, Erica and I have talked about this on the podcast before. Australia has one of the highest rates of melanoma in the world. And so it's something that, I know in Australia, they take sun safety pretty seriously because they have to, knowing that the rates are so high. But again, I think it's just really important for Bria to share her story because I think this experience for her changed her approach on sun safety, making sun protection more part of her routine. And I'm sure she's, doing that with her son, Austin, and making sure she, doesn't skip those skin checks. So Caitlyn, I'll pass it over to you. What are your thoughts on Bria's story? And do you resonate with any of the things that she shared throughout her journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I resonate so much with that lingering anxiety and feeling even after, like, my second pregnancy was it was really hard emotionally because I was just waiting for, something bad to happen. And I hate that because you guys know me. I mean, people jokingly call me sunshine and talk about I'm perpetually, positive and this, that, and the other. But I'll tell you, melanoma really brought me to my knees in terms of ability to overcome those residual anxieties and fears. And even long past pregnancy, I still get really nervous going for skin checks. You would have think that it's the first time after the diagnosis. I mean, it's been nearly 13 years and I still have to have people. I know, Leah, I've messaged you before as I go in, or I've had times where I'm waiting for results, or I got a call back and I need a wider excision on an atypical spot. And those things really do drum up the feelings that being on the wrong side of a diagnosis create. And I think there's something important about acknowledging that because, yes, of course, we care so much about our physical well-being. Like, can I survive this? Can I live to see the other side of melanoma? And then when the answer is yes, there's also this emotional piece of just how do you walk forward and allow it to inform decisions like sun safety, care, educating others, but not consume you? How do you let it be knowledge, but not something that impacts other joyful moments like a second pregnancy? And it's something I continue to learn to this day. So really grateful that in her story, she talked about the emotional aspect of a diagnosis and what it means, in the days and weeks to come.
I think going off of this too, and as my hormones are really heightened right now, the pregnancy hormones are flowing. When I was reading through these stories, I couldn't help but hold back tears. It's so hard to hear these stories. And the last one, we'll kind of talk about this too, where pregnancy is hard and holy smokes, bringing home a new baby is really hard, and figuring out with your first child, like, what do you need to do to keep this child healthy and safe and protected? But at the same time, you're also dealing with your own health and wellness and figuring out, okay, but how do I also keep myself health and safe and protected? And I won't give too much into the last story just yet because, Leah, I want to give you time to wrap up this one. But I think we'll talk a little bit in the last story about tackling the first months of motherhood when you're also trying to figure out your own health and well-being and how you personally need to be okay as well.
Yeah. No, I think just to round out this article, it's just I think knowing that I think every woman that has been pregnant or is pregnant can resonate with Bria's story. But I think it just really drives home the saying that, you can't take care of others unless you take care of yourself first, especially when you are bring a new baby into the world. And I've never been pregnant before, and obviously Erica's going through the trenches right now, and Caitlyn's been there twice. But what I do know is that there's like a shift in mindset of you will do anything for your baby, you will do anything for your child, and that is amazing and wonderful. But if you don't take care of yourself, that child's not going to have a mom. And I think it's really important for us to take a step back when we're going through all of this stuff to make sure that we're staying on top of looking at our skin, which is our largest organ, making sure that, we're staying up to date with our skin checks and our other appointments. And, the goal would be as well to when your child is born and your child is here, you are instilling those habits and that, education of protecting your skin with sunscreen and protective clothing and seeking shade, all that stuff. So you can set up your child for success when it comes to sun safety too. And I know, Caitlyn, you do it with your kiddos, and Erica, I know you're going to do it with your babies. So I think that that's also beautiful too, and sharing, for Erica, for your child, you can tell them what grandma went through, right, with her melanoma. And then Caitlyn, I mean, I don't know if you have been or will, or when that time comes, share what mom went through and how you never want your children to go through what they went through. So I know if I was pregnant or if I had a child, I'd be doing that too. So I think it's an opportunity to just, again, spread education. If we're doing it at a young age, and if we're spreading more news like this on this podcast and having more and more people talk about it, I think at the end of the day, we're saving more lives. And I think that that's truly the goal.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in and add one thing that I feel really led to share, it's that I have told my children from a very early age. I've been very public. I did a local news story pretty soon after when I still had an infant. And now that she's almost 13, we talk about it as our story. We talk about it how, like, I can't even say it. It's obviously still very emotional. That was like the first battle we fought. And there's times that when life is hard or something comes up, I will look at her and I will be like, friend, if we literally fought melanoma while you were still inside my stomach, we can most certainly get to the other side of this algebra test. So it's this point of warrior pride between us that girlfriend, we've done much harder things. We've done really hard things, like surgery during pregnancy, hard things. We've got this. Mm-hmm. The other thing is she's already had a biopsy. She had a biopsy about 2 years ago. There was a spot on her neck that was just wildly strange looking. I didn't even know how to discolored. It was kind of colorful. There was nothing else on her that looked like it. It hadn't been there forever. And fortunately, we have really great care providers in our region. And I just said, with my history with this, and he, I'm tending towards biopsy and get it gone. And he was in the same camp, and he was so good with her that she also took it as a warrior moment of this is what we do. We fight, and we have so much to live for that it's fine, and we've got this. And she has this tiny little scar on her neck and wears it proudly because she chooses to fight back too. So yes, all about sunscreen and prevention, but also normalizing dermatology care. And if we need it, we need it. And we just choose to be grateful that we continue to live this life, scars and all.
Oh my gosh, that was so beautifully said. I don't think my hormones can handle this episode, you guys. I'm going to break into tears. But that's such a beautiful way to look at it. And Leah, you absolutely know the first thing that I bought for a little baby Feggeler is a rash guard. It's already hanging in his nursery, and that is the only clothing he currently owns, but it is the most important piece that I will make sure is on his body.
I love it.
Oh my gosh. All right. I'm going to keep myself together to talk about this last story. So, it is another story from a mom who was diagnosed with skin cancer while pregnant, and she really uses her story as an opportunity to urge others to be sun safe. So, the source for this article is The Independent, which is a UK source. And Andrea Lambro of Glasgow was 36 weeks pregnant in July of 2020 when doctors informed her she had malignant melanoma. Now, the article also talks about how, as a reminder, this was during COVID. So not only was she pregnant, trying to go through pregnancy care during this time, but she was also told she had melanoma. And if you had any doctor's appointments around that time, you typically weren't able to bring in your support system. You had to go in a lot of the times by yourself and be the only advocate for yourself in the room, which is really, really hard to deal with. So Lambro, 39, first became alarmed when she noticed a dark freckle on her leg, which appeared to have grown in size. And she was referred to the dermatology department at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. They were so concerned about it that the mole was actually removed the same day. And a week later, she was told that it came back as malignant melanoma. Now, her case was a little bit different because she was told that she had to have her baby immediately to begin treatment because it was so far progressed that it wasn't something that they could perform surgery or do any kind of treatment until the baby was no longer in her body. So, after 3 major surgeries and the first 6 months of motherhood and a year and a half of immunotherapy treatment, she finally showed clear scans and she continues to do so to this day. So her cancer is now in remission, and she encourages people to take precautions to minimize the risk of getting skin cancer and get your yearly skin checks. And I'm glad I made it through that one without crying, because that is like one of my biggest fears in pregnancy, because I do know my risks and I have had some really, really weird looking moles come off my body over the past 4 years. It's been a couple a year over the past 4 years. And Caitlin, I do want to turn it over to you because you shared about the difficulties of dealing with a melanoma diagnosis while you were pregnant. But let's talk about like the first few months, because motherhood in itself, those first few months is really difficult. But can you take us back, to those early days of, okay, how can I mentally be okay during these times that are really, really challenging?
Yeah, I think one of the most eye-opening moments for me was when I got the OB on the phone and she said, "Do we need to deliver the baby tonight?" Because I had so my husband found it around 25, 26 weeks, but as you heard, I dragged my feet and I was ridiculous about it. And so I was further along. I think I was 29 or 30 weeks by the time they diagnosed. And I remember her saying, "Do we need to deliver? We can go to the high-risk hospital if I need to deliver this baby tonight." And her tenacity around preserving my life, the intensity of it, I will never forget. And fortunately, the answer was no, that we felt like the wide excision and the removal, I was really at a great point where the depth was just on the cusp of talking about sentinel lymph biopsies and such. And for as bad as it was, I had some really great features to my melanoma. And we were able to just do a surgery. I say just, but truly, you hear that news story, and yeah, just surgery. 5 or 6 days later, they had a team for the baby. They had Harper, my daughter. They had a team for her, a team for me. I was awake, and they just did their best to numb me. But at a certain point, they had to just say, like, "That's all we can give you because you're pregnant." So there was just a lot in that. There was, physical pain, fear. I'd never had surgery. But one thing that is very seemingly small that was everything is that the OB met me at the office that night. And she let me listen to Harper's heartbeat on the Doppler, and she let me record it on my phone. And when I recorded it, I would play it to myself when I was feeling anxious and I was feeling my panic start to rise. And it was like the rhythmic reminder that Harper was okay, and I knew I could be okay too. We had to really lean into our church community. They made us a ton of meals because I had surgery while pregnant and my, healing. And we all know what excisions are like. They're wild and they take so much out of you. And while my stomach was still growing, it was my lower back. So it was still stretching, and my scar is super gnarly, as I think so many of us are the proud bearers of. And so it was church, and it was church families supporting us. My parents lived nearby, and they spent a lot of time with me. And I just really had to learn the importance of community. Up to that point, I was a police officer. I prided myself to a fault on independence. I can take care of myself. I got this. And I learned from melanoma, actually, I don't. And there's actually beauty in the release of thinking that we need to have it and we need to have it all together. That's like such a lonely, hard, sad way to live. And I hate it took melanoma for me to realize the beauty in receiving help, which is actually receiving love. But in this season of life, I better ask for help and I better receive the gift of support, which it truly is a gift. So that was really critical. It was surrounding myself with people who were wanting to walk the journey with me. And now, all these years later, I surround myself with people like you two who continue to walk the journey with me and calm me down on biopsy days, or commiserate over, I call them speed bumps. I have a lot of divots and speed bumps all over and scars, but we have each other, right? And melanoma is ugly and hard and aggressive and mean, and it tries to take so much, but that's why we take back. And we take back with community and care and support and advocacy, which is why this podcast and the work you two do just so important.
I can listen to you talk all day, Caitlyn.
Yes.
You're the best.
I love it.
Seriously. I feel like too, Leah knows I can absolutely go on a tangent about community and just how important it is, especially with surrounding yourself with people who, even if they don't get it, they're willing to be the support system you need in that time where sometimes you don't even know what you need. But it is certainly helpful to have people in your corner who have been through it and they know, and they're saying all of the things that you didn't know you needed to hear. Because sometimes, when you're going through something like skin cancer, like melanoma, like cancer, or any kind of illness, people are so concerned about saying the right thing. And it's so funny because we tell people all the time, there is no right or wrong thing. There is just being there and showing up. And then, being willing to make changes to adapt if you realize that, okay, maybe this approach isn't what they need. So I'm going to change. I'm going to do this instead. And I don't know, there's just so much power behind that. And Leah knows I can talk about community all day long.
No, but you're absolutely right. This melanoma community, knowing the both of you and so many other amazing, wonderful people, changed my life. It truly is a way that, helped me get through my own melanoma diagnosis, but my dad's. There's something so special about knowing you're not alone in the fight and you're not alone in all of the nuances and things that come along with melanoma. I've said this before, people can empathize with you, your friends and family. But if you seriously haven't gone through melanoma, or if you haven't seen a loved one go through it, you don't know what it's like. And that's okay. And I don't want people to know what it's like.
Right.
But I want people to understand that even though it's just skin cancer or just melanoma, it's serious and it's cancer, especially when it's not caught early. And so this community has been life-changing, and we're lucky enough the majority of the community is women, so we can talk about all these things and feel comfortable to have a safe space to share these things when it comes to, being pregnant and having skin changes, or being pregnant and having melanoma. The community is predominantly female. We do have some token males in the community that share their story, and I'm always really grateful that they speak up and share. But just so blessed and grateful to know you both and to have this community.
Well, as we're kind of wrapping up this episode, I do want to hand it back over to you, Caitlyn, for any kind of final thoughts, final tips. It could be really anything under the umbrella. You can talk about motherhood tips and sun safety. You can talk about community, any final things that you want to leave the audience with.
Well, I think it's so important to note that my melanoma was in a place I could not see, especially because I was pregnant and I had a belly. And we've talked about it. We've kind of danced around it. Lee, I think you hit it pretty spot on, but we need to rely on our partners, our family members, our friends. Somebody needs to literally have your back. I could not have my back. My husband did. And truly it was life-saving. And so really understanding that dermatologists need to have every part of you, right? They need to look over every single part. But there's spot check every 3 to 6 months to a year, depending. but your partner or your family who's walking with you on the daily, they have a really unique opportunity to help you stay well. I also think it's worth underscoring something that Erica mentioned that I also related to, which is I just really didn't want more appointments. I was over it. I was done with it. It's so frustrating, but it was life-saving. And fortunately, I'm stubborn, but I'm only out stubborned by my husband, who was insistent on me getting good care. So those things are all super important for listeners to remember, is we have to prioritize the things that will keep us well. It is our largest organ. And caught early, thank goodness, prognosis is so good. And that's what I hold on to, is as bad as mine was, it was so good for being bad, because I had people advocating for me, because I had an exceptional dermatologist in my corner. And that's why I continue to not only see my little girl get on the bus for kindergarten, but all the way through 7th grade. And every year, back to school is one of the most significant times and days of my life, because I remember a moment that I didn't know I was going to have that blessing. And I've been blessed to go all the way through 7th grade with her. So this matters. This is literally life-saving information. And I hope everyone really takes it to heart, pregnant or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. See, now you guys know firsthand why we say Caitlyn is so inspiring, because it's just so beautifully said. And I know our audience is going to listen to this episode, Caitlyn, and they're going to want to connect with you. They're going to want to buy and read your book. They're going to want to visit your website, connect on social media. So where can they do all of the things to continue the conversation with you?
Oh, you're so sweet to ask. Well, my book is titled Worth It and Wonderful, and it's on Amazon and in some bookstores, but I'm sure Amazon's the easiest. Bright red cover with a big heart, and it's meant to encourage and uplift other women. And then I'm on Instagram. It's just Caitlyn Scaggs, so first name, last name, trying to keep it simple there. I have a website called Boldly Pursue, because I am all about going after life with intention and joy and zest. And yeah, part of the melanoma journey is what produced that approach to life. So those are some of the places you can find me. And then if you're interested in learning more about New Hope Girls, the organization that I've been so fortunate to work for, it's newhopegirls.com, and they do really beautiful work restoring communities and lives and just helping women step into freedom. So those are all things worth checking out, and definitely connect with me.
We'll put all of that in the show notes, because I'm sure people will want to check out all the things. Maybe they'll want to purchase some New Hope Girls items for Christmas, which is right around the corner, and give us holiday gifts. But Caitlyn, thank you so much for your time and for being so vulnerable with your story. I know talking about all of these things and working through these stories brings up so many emotions. So we just so appreciate your time and your willingness to be vulnerable in order to have others, feel impacted and make better decisions for their lives.
Well, it was truly an honor, and I think there's so much power in sharing our stories. So thank you for empowering me through this opportunity.
Thank you, Caitlyn. We love you.